but what I want you to really touch on and finish up on is like, where do different tools like, ice baths, foam rollers, Theraguns, different things like that are often marketed in terms of helping manage fatigue, like where do they fit into the equation?
Yeah, the big area that this fits in um, quite well for me is when you're doing a period of training or a period of competing in which your participation in that level of training is basically unavoidable, or that level of exposure is basically unavoidable. So an example of this would be, let's say you're, playing sport and it's a very intense period of the season and you just got to keep showing up to training and keep performing because this is really important. Anything you can do to get back on your feet and train again sooner and feel better sooner is fine by me. Okay. So if you feel better after a massage or foam rolling or ice bath or whatever that lets you get back on your feet, by all means go ahead. Now, the important thing is that there's a difference between recovery and an adaptation. So these things can get you back on your feet, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's leading to greater adaptations. Okay. And that's a really important point, because this is something you see with, I think, ice baths, but cryotherapy, more advanced cryotherapy in particular. You can get enhancements in recovery and the blunting of certain, inflammatory markers. But one of the trade-offs then might be that you get poor adaptations to your training, because while you can get back on your feet and get rid of some muscle soreness, you're not necessarily enhancing adaptations. You're actually compromising it because you're blunting some of the signals that would lead to adaptation. So there has to be some degree of degradation or disruption to the system where you feel a bit crap for a while for you to be able to adapt and get stronger. Now, the key thing is that when you're within a competitive phase, or let's say a multi-day competition in martial arts or the Olympics or whatever, you actually are not trying to get better. Like, you've done that. You've done all your building. You've done all your investment into your fitness. And now it's about expression. So anything you can do to get you back on your feet to express your fitness better, that's absolutely, going to be great. Now, there are plenty of people who use things like foam rolling or stretching or a Theragun after workouts to make themselves, feel better as part of a recovery routine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. If it makes you feel better, that's perfectly fine. It's certainly not a necessity. And the only time I would have an issue with, someone using these things for recovery or suggesting them for recovery would be when they're, making them out to be necessary or that they're going to massively enhance adaptations. Because the reality is they're not really. Okay. Foam rolling, for example, you might do it and get a very short-term increase in range of motion, or you might feel like you have a little bit less muscle soreness coming off it, but it's not really going to enhance your training adaptations by any stretch of the imagination. So in terms of managing overall fatigue, very minor effects, useful within competitive periods or periods where expression of fitness is a priority, probably less useful when you're just trying to build, but, personal preference as well. If it's part of your recovery routine, makes you feel good and you're not taking time away from training, by all means, go ahead. The issue is when people start to use these things as part of their limited training time. So if you're a regular person working during the day, coming home to your family at night and cooking dinner, etc., and you've got an hour that you can train per day, taking 20 minutes to foam roll out of that hour is probably a poor use of your time, when in fact you could be training more, and fatigue management probably isn't even that important because you've just got an hour to train. You need to get after it. So yeah, look, we could do a whole
Yeah, the
podcast
only
on that.
other negative to them as well, I suppose, is also the fact that people do them or use these tools instead of doing all the stuff that we just talked about in this episode and
Yes,
actually
absolutely.
managing their training or looking at their stress, looking at their lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. So that can also be a negative where people basically use them as a band-aid, because they do provide some, benefit, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
transient, I should say. Like, you'd be like, oh, actually, I feel more recovered. And, that's fantastic. If it, like you said, you're trying to compete and you're like, I have a competition in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and I just came off, another competition or another event or whatever. So they can be definitely useful in that respect. But if you're just using them every single day and you're like, I need this tool to be able to perform the next day, and you're just a general trainee, there's probably something going on there that we need to dig a little bit deeper with, because why are you feeling so fatigued? Why are you so beat up from your training sessions, from your 3 to 4 training sessions per week, that you need these different tools to be able to train, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you see that at jiu-jitsu all the time, where guys will go in, to every training session, they're sparring 100% every single round, and they're getting tapped and etc. And then they're like, oh, you know what, my shoulder's at me, what could I add in to fix that? Is there an exercise I could do? Is there like a massage? Is there something I can fix it with? And the reality is that it's addition through subtraction in that case. So it's actually about, pulling back from some of those sessions, doing a little bit less hard sparring, maybe taking one day where you just do drilling, etc. Applies to every sport. So before you consider what you can add, ask yourself, is there something that actually needs to be taken away? Like, are you doing something that's unnecessary for your athletic development that's actually just adding fatigue?